Tematski susreti jezične vrste.
Welcome to Close Encounters of the Language Kind. This episode will be broadcast recorded in English because my guest is, I almost said British, because he's American and he does speak a bit Croatian, actually a lot. My guest today is a writer, professor of political science, stand-up comedian, and all in all, a very creative person, Cody Brown. So, Cody, welcome. I have two questions for you. Who are you and what does language do for you? What does language represent?
So I'm Cody McClain Brown, and to me, language is fun.
Okay, when you say fun, it all sounds like you're not really a professor, but you are a professor, and at the same time, you do stand-up comedy, you do writing. So what do you mean by fun?
I think what I mean is that everything that I enjoy in life almost involves language and communication, right? Mm-hmm. Whether it's reading, whether it's writing, whether it's telling a joke, getting someone to laugh, or, it's just, to me, the whole world, I see it through the lens of being able to communicate verbally as opposed to visually. And so to me, it's just fun. I mean, it's something that should be messed around with. You should look at it, have fun with it, play with it, see what works, see what doesn't work in all aspects. And also since I'm trying to learn Croatian, I have to think of it as fun. Otherwise, it's murder. So,
is learning Croatian fun?
Yes, sure. I mean, it has to be fun. I'm having fun. I mean, I have fun going out there and speaking Croatian. I have fun making mistakes. I have fun getting people to laugh at my mistakes. And then I have fun when I succeed and when I get something right. It's a nice feeling of accomplishment. So that's what I mean by fun.
Uh-huh. Okay, we'll come back to Croatian. Cody, what's your story? Now you live in Croatia, you teach here, you work here, you have a family you're raising here. So how did it come that a guy from Oklahoma ended up at Vrbik?
Well, have you seen America lately? I feel
have you seen Croatia lately?
Being an expat to being a refugee. No, I met my wife in Oklahoma. And I tell this to a lot of people. She said she was from Croatia. I had no idea what that meant. I thought it meant something that had been part of Russia or maybe was still part of Russia.
That's so American of you.
Sorry?
That's so American of you.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, you couldn't get any more American, except maybe I was wearing sweatpants in class when it happened. She didn't really care for Oklahoma, and I don't really care too much for Oklahoma, especially after I saw Croatia. And we just wanted to live here and see if we could make it work. And that's coming up on 9 years. And so far, so good. We've managed to do the impossible, as many people told us it was impossible.
Okay. Since this podcast is about language, let's move back in time. So it's present day. And how have you battled the language barrier, the culture, American versus European? What has been the most difficult part, language-wise, culture-wise, and what has helped you in that process?
All right. Well, language-wise, Croatian is just incredibly difficult for an English speaker because it has so many moving parts.
I mean, like the endings, like ooh, ah.
Well, yeah, I mean, not just that, but the fact that, based on one is that it's based on the verbs are much more important in Croatian than they are in English, right? So you kind of have to orient yourself around the verbs, and then that brings us into the cases. But then you have gender, which we don't have, which changes depending the case. You have number, which changes depending the case, and then your nouns change, and your adjectives change, and your adverbs change, all depending on the case of this verb. Which, it's trying to. I described it one time as it's basically like coming up with a complicated math problem and knowing the answer as you're coming up with that problem. So if I say like, well, it's, 2,129 times 54 divided by 82, and then you know the answer, right? That's how it feels like.
And how did you feel learning Croatian? Are you learning it still, or what has been the most useful or the most fun, stage of learning Croatian?
The most fun is probably now because I'm good enough. Like, when I go out of the house, I try to only speak Croatian unless I'm teaching or talking to you. And so now I can, get a good enough grasp of the language that I can make jokes in the language, that I can realize my mistakes and stuff like that. So now it's pretty fun. At the beginning, it was very frustrating because most everybody here speaks English. And so nobody wanted to suffer through my really horrible Croatian when we could just solve the problem in English.
So you wanted to practice, you wanted to speak Croatian, but nobody, they wanted to speak English with you, right?
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't really until my pronunciation got better, right? Like, when I first got here, I would say like Hrvatska. And so like no one would talk to me. And then once I could say like Hrvatska, then once my pronunciation got better, people would speak to me, and they don't care about the cases. I can murder cases all day long. No one cares. Mm-hmm. So that's, so it was very difficult at the beginning for that reason. And now it's okay. Now people speak to me. And the biggest asset was this is going to sound like a joke, but it's not, was my punica, right? Because she doesn't speak English. She's with me all the time, especially these days because she's in quarantine with all of us. Mm-hmm.
It's the same punica you wrote a book about. More or less.
Yes, right. That punica. I don't have another one. And, she's been the biggest help because I just had to learn to understand her better and to be able to communicate with her. And now we
punicas are great. Okay, so she was the biggest help. But as you said, when you go out and everybody speaks English, how good is our English? Were you surprised? Did you know that our English was that good or not as good? Or what was it like?
I had an inclination of it because my wife's English was very good when we were in the United States. And then when, first couple times I came to Croatia, every time I met somebody, we would just speak in English. Like it was never an issue.
Okay.
So, Croatians English, most Croatians speak very good English. And it's funny because they're very embarrassed about it, They're like, my English isn't really that good. They think it's their accent that matters when it's a very subtle accent. It's not like in movies when people talk like this, there's like, it's almost flawless except maybe with articles, and no one cares about articles.
Yeah, that's right. That's what I tell my students, stop obsessing with the accent. It's even better, girls like the cool accent. And by the way, accent kind of tells the story where you come from and the fact that you have mastered English in such a way that you can hear that it's not your mother tongue.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, it's really incredible how self-conscious people are about this stuff. And meanwhile, I say like 3 things in decent Croatian with only, I only mess up the gender of one of the words, and everyone's like, "Oh, pričaš hrvatski, bravo," and it's like, okay,
bravo.
And I think, but part of that's also because, I taught English in some other countries, right, and Croatians are very realistic about who and where they are in the world. Okay. And so they understand that if they want any access to all the other stuff that's out there, they need to know another language.
Okay.
And, whereas other countries I taught in were not like that. They were much more, nationalist when it came to language and really didn't want to learn another language if they didn't have to. Probably kind of like Americans.
So how do we stand among these countries? Are we the best in English proficiency? Absolutely. Cool. This was language. What about the culture? The language brings with itself a certain culture, and our culture has been influenced by American culture in the media, the popular culture. Were you surprised when you noticed this, or how did you see this when you first arrived?
I think so. There's definitely huge differences between American culture and Croatian culture, but there's also a lot of overlap.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the places I find that overlap is strongest is in humor. And it really, it's very endearing to me that I can sort of have a side career as whether it's doing stand-up comedy or writing humorous books, and that will get my jokes, right? And I think some of that comes from the fact that there's so much American media here and American television shows that you all know American humor, right? Or you've been exposed to it, so you kind of know when to laugh. One of the first things that my mother-in-law and I bonded over was Everybody Loves Raymond. I thought
it was Seinfeld. Okay, Everybody Loves Raymond.
Yes,
well, that's actually so fitting.
Sorry?
That's fitting, right? Mother-in-law.
I actually didn't like that show until I got here, and then I lived with a crazy lady. I was like, oh, this is like Everybody Loves Raymond. But she would also, she would use that as a window into my culture and always ask me, like, why are they doing this? Why are they selling things in front of the house? Or can you really do that? But, so that was easy. And it also makes it easier for me to live here because one of the advantages to being an American abroad is you don't miss your culture because it's everywhere.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I turn on the radio, I hear songs that I grew up hearing. I go to the movies, I see American films. I turn on TV, I see American shows. And that's one of the reasons why my wife and I actually, I think subconsciously, one of the reasons why we decided to live here is because my daughter will be American no matter what, but only by living in Croatia can she be Croatian. You're never going to drive down the road in America and turn on the radio and hear a Azra song or something.
So we have been Americanized in a lot of ways, huh?
Yes.
You mentioned your daughter. This is the fun thing I notice about your daughter. You always tell me this. So she's completely bilingual, right? Can you explain exactly what that means?
Yeah, so what that means is her brain uses different languages depending on who she's speaking to naturally, right? So when she sees me and speaks to me, her brain is just working in English. And when she talks to her mom and speaks to her mom, her brain is just working in Croatian.
So there's no way she'll speak to you in Croatian?
She has never said anything to me in Croatian. She just can't. Her brain is like...
Have you tried, tell me this word, tell me this in Croatian?
Yeah, she'll tell me how to say something. I can ask her. I'll be like, well, how do I say that? Or she'll tell me, the other couple days ago, well, I guess about a couple months ago, we were in the elevator and this guy was talking to me. And I was talking to him and she was in there and then we got out and she said, Daddy, did you understand what that guy was saying? And I was like, I think so. And she's like, I don't think he understood what you were saying. I was like, why? What did I say that was wrong? She's like, well, I understood what you were saying because I understand you're bad Croatian. But, so she'll give me some pointers, but she has never turned to me and spoken in Croatian.
Well, that's so strange, but it makes sense. Bilingual brains are, she has two mother tongues, right?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It's a bit humorous when we are all at the dinner table because we don't want to leave my mother-in-law out. So I will speak to my daughter in Croatian, and then she'll speak to me in English, and then I have to translate it for my mother-in-law, which is just strange.
What about when she speaks to her grandma?
Well, when she speaks to her grandma, she speaks Croatian.
Okay.
So, but if she and I are having a conversation, she she just thinks it's weird that she has to translate this stuff. She could explain it to her if she wanted to, but usually it's like every time when you hear somebody speaking a foreign language, you can imagine whatever it is you think they're talking about. And I think that's what my mother-in-law is always thinking when my daughter and I speak English. She's like, I wonder what they're saying. And then it's so lame and banal that my daughter's like, I'm not going to be bothered explaining this, but I will do it because I'm polite.
I'm imagining this situation, at the dinner table. Okay. We'll keep talking about language, but now let's shift to your teaching part. So you said our English skills are pretty good or great. Your daughter's bilingual. You are a professor of political science. You work at higher education. So what can you say about the proficiency students have? So this will be, 18-year-olds onwards, undergraduate students. And also you can talk about your daughter's English in school. What's your, impression of how we teach our kids English in schools?
All right. Yeah, I mean, my students have very high levels of comprehension, but their output, I think, should be better than it is.
Language production, like speaking.
Yeah, speaking and writing. And I don't think they are given the opportunities in the latter grades of high school or to really develop their output, their production, that can be on the same level with their comprehension. Okay,
so you think the focus lies too heavily on reception and not production?
Right, yeah, absolutely. And part of that's probably, class size, but part of that's also just the structure of the education system here. It's much more on, sitting and listening and then having one instant of assessment rather than continual assessment. Right now I'm trying to get my students to write articles in English, like forms of narrative nonfiction, and they're trying, and I'm happy that they're trying, but it's quite revealing what they don't know when they actually do this. But that's why we're teaching it to them. Yeah. So, but I think if it was a more balanced approach in the secondary education, that they would be much stronger than they are now. Okay. And with my daughter's English, I really I get very frustrated because I see in the curriculum a couple mistakes that I think that the whoever established this curriculum years ago has made.
What?
Well, one is they try to treat English language is very nuanced, and different languages have different nuances about words and meanings.
Okay, can you explain what you mean when you say nuanced?
Well, I'm saying there's not how do I put it? There aren't necessarily rigid rules of meaning for each word, right? And in one language, you might have these words mean these things, and in English, it seems like these words are the equivalent, but they're not really. I know this sounds very vague because I can't remember the exact exercise, but one time I was trying to help a neighbor's daughter with English.
Okay.
And it had these rigid categories that you were supposed to orient these words into these groups, and it didn't make any sense to me. And it only made sense if you translated it into Croatian.
Oh, that's strange.
Right? And then my biggest gripe is how they teach this construction of has got or have got.
Okay.
Like, I have got a friend.
And not teaching I have a friend.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can say I have got, right? I mean, people do say that. They say it in British more than they do in American English. But usually it's in some kind of quantity, right? Like, have you got any money? No, I haven't got any money. Or it's something that has been recently acquired, like, oh, I've got an idea. Let's go to the movies. But here they teach it on the simple possessive. And what's more frustrating to me is not so much with my daughter, but when I've been teaching other kids English, to help out neighbors or something, I teach them, they say, the question is, have you got a friend? And I say, yes. And you can reply, I have a friend. And then the teacher counts that wrong.
Yeah, that's too rigid.
Yeah, like there's, and that's what I'm saying. Now, of course, you have to understand the rules when you're learning a language. That's true. But, just because it's written in the book this way by somebody who created the curriculum in 1994, doesn't mean it has to stick that way, especially when it's wrong. So,
especially when the language is fluid. And for a long time, there was this over-reliance on British English, right? You would not have stated, the equivalent of this expression in American English, but things are getting better, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the problem there is, look, in the 1990s, when the curriculum was set up, there was much more British influence than American influence. But now it's really funny, and I have colleagues who are British that I've spoken to about this. I mean, it annoys them too because now they have British spelling with American diction. or British phrases, but it's still in a broader American construction, and it annoys them to no end, just like it annoys me. So it's now this weird hybrid American-British English, Well,
it just goes to show how English is prone to change, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's, and that's the thing too, is English is it's a very adaptable language, and it's, I mean, at the local level, languages really are, but I think, on a personal level, like a community level, languages are, you look at Dalmatia, parts of Dalmatia, people are going to speak differently than in other areas. But I think the big difference with English is that we don't have this, our nationality isn't wrapped up in it, right? So we're not defensive about it. Don't mind adapting other words. We don't have this set standard of what is standard English. It's much more fluid and sort of vague once you get out of the basics, whereas I think in Croatian and countries where their language is much more patriotic, there is this more rigid sense of these are the rules, this is the language, and it has to be more formalized. That's just my idea. I don't know if that's true. It's just
we're more German than we are English, maybe in that way.
Yeah.
The rigidness. Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about how you use your language. You are a writer, and that's kind of how you, how people got to know you better through your writing. How did that occur? Where's that creative spark? What sparked that first writing idea, and why are you a writer, basically?
Well, I knew I wanted to be a writer when I was 18.
Really?
Yeah, that was when I started reading sort of non-lectira literature, right? Like not the stuff for school, but stuff that was still literature, but more fun or more interesting. So my big influence was Henry Miller, right? Who went off to Europe and wrote nonfiction-ish books, although he had a lot more sex than I do. But he was a big inspiration. And one of the reasons was also, so I come from a family of artists. Pretty much everybody in my family is an artist. And I can draw, but I realized that it was a lot easier to write a description of something, like in a paragraph, than to put all the time in to draw and paint some picture.
Oh, so you're not the fine art kind of guy. You're more of a verbal.
Yeah, right. Like basically out of laziness, to me it was, or just in my toolbox, it was, because I wasn't even very good at writing back then. It was just more readily available. I didn't have to have a canvas. I didn't have to have pens. I didn't have to have time. I could just sit and write whenever I wanted to. And so that kind of started it. And then I wrote and wrote and wrote. Nothing ever came of it until I moved here and started writing a blog, and then out of my blog came my first book. So kind of like Croatia became like my muse, where I found where I found my voice, which was apparently a funny guy who had moments of feeling and insight into odd situations.
What do you think? Do you think that was the key to audiences receiving you that well? What do you think the key was in your writing success?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was, one of the biggest compliments I've ever received was from my former publisher. And he told me, when I read what you've written, it's something I never thought about before, but as soon as I read it, it's something that I always knew.
That's a great compliment.
Or something like that. Right. So like basically he was telling me, you are revealing truths to us that we weren't necessarily consciously aware of, which to me as a writer is the best thing you can do.
So that's how you actually penetrated the audiences and reached out with your hand. This is how you communicated to us. Yeah, right. Now that wasn't by plan. It just was the fact that, I had this situation and I practiced writing so long or had wanted to do it that it just all kind of came together at the right time. So now that they have told you this, and now that you know how this works, do you always have this in mind when you write now? Do you always think about this? How do you know how to keep it going? How do you know how to keep communicating with your audience?
Mm-hmm. Well, when it comes to writing about Croatia, it's kind of, it's actually the best way to compare to, I think, is, and I had a writing professor in college who would talk about it like this. Mm-hmm. It's like being an athlete. When you are in your physical fit form and you would have practiced running or practiced this sport again and again and again and again, you just know when you're going to make that shot, mm-hmm. or you know when you're going to finish that race. And you have the muscle and enough, and the muscle does most of the work, and then you have enough insight into what you're doing. Not that it dominates it, you don't second guess yourself all the time, mm-hmm. but that you can nudge it and move it and see where it needs to go, and then you know that you've done this. So I don't really try to think about the audience, right? I don't think like, oh, people are going to love it when they read this. I just think about what I'm trying to create, and I let the muscle do most of the work, and then I sort of revise it and nudge it into a completed scene or a form or a joke or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what's the most difficult part of that process?
It's not really, it's not that difficult. I guess the most difficult part is just making yourself do it. Mm-hmm. Because no one's going to make you do it. No one is saying, oh, you better do this. The money's not good enough that mm-hmm. you're like, oh, I better do this so I can become rich. Mm-hmm. You don't do it for the money. You just do it because you want to. But that's, life gets in the way, especially, when you're 40, have 2 other jobs and a kid.
Mm-hmm. But what about like writer's block? Do you have those? And then how do you overcome those?
Yeah, I don't know actually, because I have probably hundreds of stories that I have started that I haven't finished, uh-huh. that I probably never will finish, and so you kind of just I just let the story work itself out. If it's meant to be finished, I'll finish it. If not, I won't. Mm-hmm. And when I'm writing about Croatia, I've never had like really writer's block. It's never a problem.
We are a good inspiration to you, huh?
Yeah, it's also easier because it's nonfiction. It's not like I'm mm-hmm. creating a whole world. I'm writing about myself, so it's just, I have that much of an ego that I never have a problem writing about myself.
Okay, you mentioned nonfiction, but you also wrote something fictional. Why don't you tell us about that?
So I did write. I guess part of the dream to be a writer was to not just write, humorous memoirs about my mother-in-law, but to try to write a novel or some kind of made-up story. And so I did that. It's a book in English called Hard Case in Holiday City, and it's a kind of detective story about a city where all the characters from Holidays live, and they act like mafias and they fight each other. Mm-hmm. And when elf murders an Easter egg, there's a detective that has to try to solve that murder. And that's what the story is about.
This is what I call the Bugs Bunny book.
It's when I finished it, I was like, oh, wait, this is just kind of like Roger Rabbit.
But you wrote it in English or you wrote it in Croatian or what happened?
Oh, I wrote it in English. I can't write anything in Croatian.
So you have them translate this, or do you assist?
Translate.
Are you involved in that process?
No. Mm-hmm. They do not ask me anything about the translation. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. Sometimes I wish they would, mm-hmm. But other times, it's these things are done on such a tight budget, on such a tight timeline mm-hmm. that I just kind of have to trust the translator and say, he knows better than me or she knows better than me, mm-hmm. and let it go.
Okay. Stand-up is also very creative, and it makes sense that you would do it. Do you base your stand-up on the same kind of humor that you use in your nonfiction books, or what is it?
Yeah, it's basically just me making jokes about Croatia or being in Croatia, or Croatian. And that's where I really enjoy the language, right? I have one joke that's about, Croatian names, right? And to me, when you deconstruct the language like this, it can be very funny. So to me, it's very funny that Croatians don't say "my name is," they say "I call myself."
Yeah, so I'm saying, yeah.
That's already weird. Like I call myself. Like, okay, you can call me whatever, but I'm going to call myself. And then when you go into these kind of like classic Croatian names and break it down, then it sounds like some kind of epic Lord of the Rings thing, right? Like, I call myself, some say Branimir. I call myself Peace Defender.
But it's so cool. Right? Come on, man. Peace Defender. Now I want to be called Branimir.
So in the way that the joke works is I say, I call myself, and I do Peace Defender, I do Peace Ringer, so Zvonimir, Branimir. And then my favorite one is I call myself Yes Peace. That's Damir, right? And then so that gets a lot of laughs, and then I end it by saying, and I have a friend named Nenad, but his case is just kind of hopeless, right?
Hopeless,
and that's where I think I have this advantage as being a learner of Croatian, because I'm going to literally translate these names. No Croatian ever does that.
Of course they don't.
No one says like, "Oh, my name is Yes Peace," right?
Would it work though? Would it work if we did it? If Croatian people did it? Would it be strange? You have some kind of authenticity when you do this.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's actually one of the key things to humor is humor isn't just about being comical. It's about talking about things that are true, right? And so these names, they don't really translate like that, but from my perspective, they do. So it is true. It's honest in that sense. No. So, and then also my other killer joke is the one about
hey, don't reveal all your jokes because people have to pay to see you.
Well, yeah, okay, all right. So do you want one more?
Yeah, give us one more.
Is it okay if I curse?
Yeah, sure. All right,
so to me it's very funny that to say I don't give a damn or I don't give a shit. In Croatian you say "boli kurac," which is literally "my dick hurts."
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know about most people, but when my dick hurts, that's about as far away from not caring as I can get.
That's the opposite.
Yeah, right. So
I would never think about this.
Nobody actually thinks about what that means. Like in Dalmatia, they do this weird thing where it'll be like hoćeš ići na blah blah blah, and it's like hoću kurac, right? like no one actually thinks about that. So again, it's just me kind of translating this stuff literally and being like, wait a minute, that makes zero sense.
Yeah. But people respond well, right, to this kind of deconstruction of the language. Yeah.
I mean, those jokes are kind of my tent poles of my set right now. My set, I got like about a 30-minute solid set, and those are some of the key jokes in it. So, and they get a good response. Although a few months ago, before the Corona thing happened, I opened for a comic, but it was an expat night.
Okay.
And my jokes didn't go over that well because these were a bunch of foreigners. And so that's also the funny thing is like my jokes are really designed for Croatians.
Oh, that's bad timing.
Yeah. So, I mean, they didn't know what kulin was. And I don't know how you can live in Croatia and not know what kulin is or padežima. So,
who are these people?
Apparently a bunch of diplomats and foreigners that come here and just kind of hang around but don't actually get into the culture.
Okay, so writing, fictional, non-fictional writing, stand-up, any other creative process that you still wish to pursue or that you have pursued?
Well, I mean, I'm currently working on trying to get a sitcom going with Robert Knyaz and I are working on this. I want to play me in a sitcom. So, again, it's like writing. Okay, I'm writing a book about myself. That's not that hard. So I'm playing me in a TV show. That's not so hard. But that's what's funny about that is even as a writer, writing for using language in a different medium is very challenging. It's like going from painting and you know how to paint and then you're supposed to be a sculptor. And that's the challenge. So I'm really struggling creatively with how to translate all the stuff I use in stand-up and all the stuff I use in my books into a visual medium.
Screen.
But right? And even as a script, but we're working on it, and hopefully we'll get there. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Are you creative in teaching, or is it less creative? It's much more rigid. I know it's political science, but you also work with journalists. Is there?
I try to be creative. To me, I'm at my best when I can get the students to create something, mm-hmm. and then I can help them unlock more of their creative side, right, to do it better. Mm-hmm. That's when I really enjoy teaching, and when I'm at my best when it comes to teaching writing or something like that. Mm-hmm. And then I use being a professor has helped me with the stand-up, because when I'm on stage in a room full of people who are drunk looking to laugh, that's a lot easier than when I'm in front of the class at 8:30 in the morning and everybody hates me because I made them come.
So you're saying stand-up is easier than being in a classroom?
Yes.
To you?
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
You don't get stage fright?
No, because none of those people are going to hate me. Right? None of those people, I'm not going to waste their time. Whereas in, when I'm teaching, the students are there. They have to be there at 8:30. Mm-hmm. And I feel like I really have to deliver. I really have to give them something that made it worth them getting up and coming to the class.
Makes sense.
I feel like a lot of times they don't understand what I'm trying to do, because they just think learning a language is more grammar. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm trying to get them to do the output. I'm trying to get them to produce things by speaking and talking and writing. And they look at me like, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. Just give us the worksheet.
Give us the present simple versus present continuous worksheet.
Yeah. Again.
For the 700th time. Let's talk about problems that you've had in language. Obviously, you spoke about creation and learning it, but what about, communicating with people here, or even the fact that you are more creative than the rest of the people? What would you say are the problems that you've had in communicating with people here or back home or wherever you've been?
Well, here it's always a challenge, just because I feel bad when I should communicate something in Croatian, and then I have to spend a lot of time trying to write that email in this really high, fancy academic language that doesn't come natural to me in Croatian, and so I feel bad about that. Mm-hmm. That's a challenge. I think it's not so much about language, but one of the biggest differences here is just expectations, right? Mm-hmm. Like understanding what people expect from you and what I expect from them, there's a big cultural difference there.
Okay. What do you mean? Can you give us an example?
Well, just the university system, in American universities, we don't really have exams, depending on what you study, right? Mm-hmm. So as I was an English major, in my undergrad, I had maybe 4 exams the entire time I was at college. Everything else was papers and stories and
term papers,
things like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I would like my students to do that too. Mm-hmm. But if I ask them to do something like that, they look at me like I'm from the moon, and they want me just to give them an exam. And then they want to go along their day. So, it's just, I don't think they understand what they need to learn or do as university students, mm-hmm. Part of that's also because they're not paying much for their university. Mm-hmm. And in the States, we pay a lot, so we don't want to waste it. Mm-hmm. So just those kinds of things are some of the bigger differences. It's just I really feel like a lot of my students would be happier if I just gave them grammar worksheets and we went over everything that they've already had 20 times, and I never asked them to speak or write anything.
Maybe it's because of that reception versus production.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of them are nervous about it, but I do have to say, we're into the tail end of the last semester that I'll have them, and now they are submitting work to me, and I'm very proud of them for doing that and trying and giving it a go, and then I'm
you see the progress, right? You see the progress.
Yeah, and I'm critiquing. Just the fact that they're doing it, But I wish they could. I wish somehow I could get them to do that from the beginning of the year, and it just takes a lot of effort. So
you want to be a dictator and have all the courses to yourself. That's what you want.
No, what I want is I want them to come to class with a pen and paper.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
And I want them to come to class with the idea that, okay, I'm here. What will I learn? Not, I'm here. What do I have to do to pass the exam?
I'm here. What do I have to do to leave?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what I want them to come. And then if I say, hey, let's try writing something, to not be like, effort, and I understand. I mean, I understand that they don't want to do the effort because they're nervous and embarrassed.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think a lot of it's just getting them to the point where they will actually try.
Like being externally motivated instead of internally.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But like I said, I mean, that's also the hardest part about writing is getting yourself to do it because no one's going to make you do it.
Mm-hmm. You said that we have been Americanized in culture and language, but this being Europe, this being Croatia, do you still see differences in kind of language, English language that we have here, despite that Americanization? And is anything like really intriguing to you, something that you've noticed only by living here?
Well, I don't know so much about how, I mean, you guys, people will still use English incorrectly in certain ways. But I mean, there's still, Croatians are still definitely their own culture. And when it comes into like teaching, this is true. Like America is much more individualistic than people in Croatia are, and I think that's to America's detriment. I like Croatia because you guys have these longer and more enduring relationships, mm-hmm. and sort of these constraints on each other or obligations to each other that in America we don't have.
Okay. They would call you a socialist if you had that.
Yeah, sure, exactly, right. I mean, the fact that Croatia's a poor country that gives healthcare and free education to people. Uh-huh. Like what? But not just that, just the fact that I mean, I always ask my students or my friend, people I know, like, can you say no to a friend? And they're like, oh yeah, but then it just means you're not friends anymore. Oh, yeah. I'm like, right, so you really can't. In America, we just say no all the time. I like that there's this obligation and these sort of communal and social norms that are still practiced here.
Uh-huh. In your book, I think at some point you mentioned that, in America you would get your waiter at a cafe coming to you, is everything okay? Being really polite. And especially in Dalmatia, where you were writing about, there's a lot of this, non-fake politeness. So there's lack of it.
Yeah, that's a very good point. In America, you guys aren't Americanized enough where you raise your voice 2 octaves when you meet someone in this really airy politeness,
hey,
oh hi, right? Or thanks so much. I can't stand hearing that now.
Okay.
When I hear Americans do it, because to me it just seems so artificial.
So is that kind of politeness that you get from your waiter? You're saying it's all fake, or what?
Yeah, I mean, it's not it doesn't mean your waiter secretly hates you.
Yeah.
But, your waiter is not going to remember you when you leave.
Uh-huh.
Even though
so it's exaggerated.
For half an hour, he was acting like you guys were best friends because he would get anything you wanted. Whereas in Croatia, you'll get ignored by the waiter. But if you go there enough, then the waiter's going to give you a free drink and be like, hey, and actually have a real conversation with you and see how it's going.
So in a way, we are more honest, right? In the sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. In that sense. In other ways, it's a little bit more complicated because sometimes I've encountered where if you ask somebody a question and if they don't know the answer, they won't tell you they don't know the answer. They'll likely just ignore you. Right?
Okay.
That's kind of how I've encountered. So to me, when I find somebody who will answer me honestly, and in any kind of relationship here, I really appreciate that. Mm-hmm. I like being told no rather than being ignored or told something.
Mm-hmm. One of the things
that's also because I can't pick up between the lines. Maybe somebody's telling me no, but they're not coming out and telling me no. So I'm still thinking oh, well, there's a possibility here.
Maybe they're being polite.
Right. And that's where I miss all kinds of social cues on Croatian politeness.
Oh, really?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, my wife will tell me, she'll be like, well, when he said that, he actually meant this. And I'll be like, oh, really? Well,
can you give us an example? Can you give us an example?
I don't know if I can think of an actual specific example. But I will say that, Croatian is, it's more nuanced, right? To me, Americans are either this clear fake, right? Like, oh, hi, right? Or we're very direct and straightforward.
Uh-huh.
Whereas Croatians will be much more in between the lines.
Sneaky.
No, it's not sneaky. It's polite, right?
Right.
It's kind of saving face, right? It's not embarrassing somebody.
Okay. In that sense. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But when they do that, I mean, I just look at them like a deer in headlights, because I'm like, I'm not picking up on your cues.
Mm-hmm. Would you say this is Croatian or European?
It could be more like continental European.
Mm-hmm.
I think British people. No, yeah, British are also very indirect. I mean, I think it's an American thing, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And part of it might come down to the fact that America is a melting pot of cultures, and we can't be dialed into the nuance of each culture. So you kind of have to be direct just to cut through everything.
Let me ask you about foreign languages. We'll learn a lot of English. So now it's, I guess, 12 years formal education. There's a second language, usually German or Italian. Does this happen in the United States? And do Americans speak more languages? And how do we compare to the States in that aspect?
Well, I don't know how it is now. When I was in school, we started learning a second language in 6th grade. We had 1 year where we took 4 languages as kind of like a sampler,
mm-hmm.
right? So I was able to take Japanese, German, French, and Spanish. And then I went with Spanish. So then I had Spanish 7th and 8th grade. And then I also had it in 9th grade. Most people I know study at least 2 years of a foreign language.
Okay.
Right. And usually it's Spanish, because if you're from Oklahoma, Spanish is like a second language.
Okay.
But, again, studying a language in school and actually being able to speak that language are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons why I think Croatians can speak English so well is because they are not just exposed to it at school, they are exposed to it in film and movies and all kinds of stuff, right? And they have a big incentive to learn it. As an American, where the whole world speaks English, I can study Spanish, I can learn Spanish, but I'm not going to be consumed with Spanish,
mm-hmm.
and I'm probably not going to become that fluent unless my circumstances require me to.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
I studied Spanish and then Latin, and then in college I took French, and then after that I did Arabic and Turkish and then Croatian.
So how many of these are you fluent in?
I speak English.
Hey, Croatian, you speak Croatian. Every time we grab a beer, you can order beer.
But again, that's because that was the environmental and circumstantial context that where
mm-hmm.
I had to learn it.
Mm-hmm.
So I never mastered any of those other languages.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, that's the point. You have to use the language, otherwise there's no point. There's no, it's not theory. It's not mathematics. You're going to have to use it.
I studied Croatian for 3 years when I was getting my PhD in the United States, and then I came here and I was saying, ja živim u Hrvatskoj. It was awful. And it was living here and having to produce it
mm-hmm.
in an authentic way that I actually finally started progressing.
And how did you learn Croatian? I mean, did you use books, textbooks, online courses? What?
I had a class. It was very funny.
Croatian for foreigners.
Foreigners in quotes, because in my Croatian class was taught by a Slovene, who, she was born in Yugoslavia, so she spoke, Croatian. And then it was in the class were first year had quite a few students, and then second year they all dropped out. And then it was me, 2 Croatians from were Croatian ancestors whose parents were from Croatia, and then one guy whose parents were Bosnian Serbs.
Tough crowd.
The two from Croatia, their parents were from Zagorje or Međimurje, somewhere near Slovenia.
Okay.
And so they would actually always ask questions. They're like, well, can't we say it like this? And then the teacher would say, no, that's Slovenian. So, right? And then I was there, and I had, I was speaking a little bit with my wife, and I knew some Croatian. And so I had like a more Dalmatian accent. And then this Serbian guy was doing Serbian. And so, if we all did our homework together, I'd write like half my homework in Serbian. So I'd be like, ja razumem lipu pismu, right? Like, and my teacher was like, no, you have to pick one or the other, and you can't write in Dalmatian.
You have to be consistent as well. That was the case, for a long time in Germany. They taught, I think they still do BKS. Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian as a single, So
one of the textbooks we had was actually a German textbook for Croatian.
Did it say BKS?
It was. And we call it BCS, Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian.
Okay. Croatian in front of the Serbian, okay. And how do you talk to your wife? Croatian?
We speak English. We speak some Croatian. We try to speak more and more Croatian now that I actually can. But when I met her, I knew nothing. I didn't know any Croatian. I didn't even know where Croatia was. But one time I did. The first Croatian word I ever learned was dobar dan.
Okay.
And that was because I went to the bookstore and I found a Croatian book. I didn't buy it. I just looked up a few words. And then when I went and picked her up for like our, one date or something, I said that to her.
And you won her over.
Yeah.
With
right.
dobar dan.
So she was very surprised. But no, and then we, when I was trying to learn Croatian at the beginning, talking to me would have been like talking to a dog. So, it's very hard for us to switch. But we do it more now. We'll have whole afternoons where we speak Croatian.
Did you, because we always tell our students, watch the American shows. Do you watch Croatian soap operas or anything like that?
I don't watch soap operas, but I watch the news. I watch like game shows like Potiera. I watch Prime Time with, on N1, the satire show. So, I watch those things and can understand. I have a good sense of everything that's going on. Sometimes I'll need some help on the details. Okay.
What would you say your proficiency level is now? Like a B1, B2?
Yeah. So, I'm probably between B2 and C1.
Okay. Have you in any way spread the Croatian language and culture back home or when you visit?
Yeah, well, that's the funny thing. So my parents are real into this stand-up stuff, so I send them videos of my jokes and things, and they want to hear my jokes. I'm like, all right, but you're not going to really get it. But, they get it, and they think it's funny. And my dad loves Mujo jokes. Like, he thinks Mujo jokes are just hilarious. I don't tell them to him in Croatian. I translate them into English, but he just thinks they're hilarious. So I'm spreading the culture back home.
Oh, that's good.
Because I think there's a lot from Croatian culture that Americans could learn that would make life in America much better.
Okay, that's a good. Well, nearing the end. So let me just ask you this: has there ever been like a situation, maybe an urgent one, where you had to use Croatian? Maybe somebody coming to you asking for directions, or even something like an emergency. Have you ever had the chance to be a hero by using Croatian language?
Yeah, so one time, a couple of weeks ago, or a few months ago, I guess it was, there was a car driving around, and they were from Pula, right? Because, I like how you can see where everybody's from by their license plates.
Okay, yeah.
They asked me where the zoo was. And we were, I'm in Better I'm like, man, you guys are way far away from the zoo. And I was able, and I was like, why don't you have, like, Google Maps?
Why did you Google Maps?
So But I was able to. I don't know if they ever made it to the zoo, but I was able to give them directions to the zoo in Croatian that I think they could follow.
And could you see from their, voice and faces, did they get it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, they understood what I was saying.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. Like that's the funny thing, and it's kind of like with my students too. Like I might walk around thinking like, oh, I don't really know Croatian that well, or I might be self-conscious about it when I'm in like a higher setting, like at the university when we're having a meeting or something. But on a daily basis, and that's the big test for a foreigner here is when you can speak in Croatian, and the person you are speaking to will keep the conversation in Croatian. Then you know that you are doing okay.
Oh yeah, that's right. Makes sense.
And that happened. I mean, I've been doing that for like the last 6 years.
Yeah. Good. And your students, do they sometimes are they aware that you can speak Croatian, or do they think you can't? And are there any funny stories about that? Maybe.
Yeah, sometimes they forget or they don't really understand, and then I will call them out on something, right? When I hear them say something that's like not against me, but something a little bit odd. So
they'll be speaking Croatian, and you'll be saying, "Hey."
Yeah, I'll be like, molim, and then they're like, "Oh crap." So yeah, they definitely do that. But to be honest, too, a lot of times, it's very hard for me to understand them. The hardest thing about Croatian when you're trying to eavesdrop in Croatian is that Croatian doesn't really use subjects the way English does, right? Because you use the verbs and it's conjugated into the verb. So if you miss the subject, right, if I miss the subject of the conversation, then I have no idea what they're talking about. I know what the action is. I know the thing that's doing the thing, but I don't know what that thing is. And my language skills aren't developed enough where I can pick it up by context, right? And so if I eavesdrop something, or even when we're with friends, at coffee and everybody's speaking Croatian and I'm speaking Croatian, but if I drift off just for a second and then we get back into the conversation, then I don't know what's happening. And if I ask people to clarify, that will ruin the spell. And everybody else starts speaking English. So I'm like, no, I don't need you to speak English. You just need to tell me what the subject of the conversation is, and then I will understand.
It sounds like a really, tedious process.
Yeah, it is. It can be definitely.
Okay, well, Cody, this has been, a fascinating insight into what it's like for an American to be in a culture that's Americanized, but uses another language and doesn't want to speak to you in that language always. So,
it just comes back to my first thing. Means it's fun.
Yeah, fun. So it's not tedious, it's fun.
Yeah, fun. Good. There's another word for tedious.
Okay. Good. Do you have any suggestions maybe for a podcast that's about language and people who use language, not necessarily linguists and translators and teachers? Is there something you would like to listen to, that concerned language in any way?
I'd like to listen to politicians, right? Because to me, one thing I feel like American politicians are all, we have all these strategists and people who are all about language, right? And I don't know if it's the same in Croatia. I'd like to know how some politician sees language and uses language in communicating both their messages to the people and also their campaigns and their re-election bids and all that stuff.
Well, funny story. Funny you should mention politicians. That was the first guest that I invited, but they still haven't responded. but however, they said they said yes to coming on the podcast. But then when I explained what this is about, then I received no reply. So if they're listening, you said yes, so you promised. And voters like promises, so I hope they will decide to join me. Okay, Cody, thank you so much for taking 1 hour plus some minutes to discuss language, and thank you for sharing your personal stories and insights. And this is probably going to be the only podcast episode recorded in English. Close Encounters of the Language Kind. Hey, what do you think about the name?
I like it.
Is it Cody creative?
Yeah, I mean, it's it's a bit punny and, works on things, different levels. I mean, that's my second book is called Croatia Strikes Back. Right?
Hey, we're in the same line of business.
Yeah, taking science fiction
That's
titles.
right, turning them into something else. Yeah. Good. Okay, Cody, thank you so much. And listen to other episodes in Creation where I host guests who use language in one way or another to achieve some career goals, to operate in this world, and to privately or professionally become better by using the language. This has been Cody McClain Brown in Close Encounters of the Language Kind.